In 1892, federal agents found an 8-year-old girl buried up to her neck in the Arizona desert. She was still alive, barely. Her skin had already started the mummification process while her heart was still beating. But that's not even the worst part. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you think you know about pre-Columbian justice systems, because this wasn't random cruelty. This was calculated, and in some cases, it was voluntary. By the end of this video, you'll understand 3 things that historians actively avoided publishing for decades. First, the specific burial technique that kept victims fully conscious for up to 7 days while their bodies slowly dried from the inside out. Second, why certain Native American tribes considered this more merciful than a quick death. And third, the archaeological discovery from 1994 that proves someone actually chose this fate, prepared for it, fasted for it. If you're ready to confront history's most unsettling truths, hit subscribe right now, because what comes next gets considerably darker. And next week, I'm uncovering the execution method that made the Spanish Inquisition look tame by comparison. But first, we need to talk about what alive actually meant to the people who practiced this. Because here's what nobody tells you. The American Southwest doesn't just preserve bodies, it transforms them. The combination of extreme heat, near-zero humidity, and mineral-rich sand creates natural mummies that last centuries. You've probably seen these in museums: leathery skin, preserved facial expressions, bodies frozen in their final moments. But there's a difference between natural mummification and what we're discussing today. Natural mummification happens after death. The desert air wicks away moisture slowly over weeks or months from a corpse that feels nothing. What certain ancestral Puebloan, Fremont, and Mojave region tribes practiced was something else entirely. They understood the desert's preservative properties so well that they could induce the mummification process in a living person, slowly, methodically, while keeping them conscious. Let me be crystal clear about why this matters and why I'm risking demonetization to tell you this story. This isn't about feeding the savage, primitive stereotype. These weren't mindless acts of cruelty. These were complex judicial and spiritual systems that challenge our modern assumption that quick death equals mercy. Some of the people who endured this fate actually requested it. Some were convicted criminals. One was a child accused of witchcraft. And one case ended with something archaeologists officially classified as physiologically improbable. I verified every detail you're about to hear through Spanish missionary accounts from the 1630s, Bureau of Indian Affairs reports, university archaeological studies, and preserved oral traditions. These aren't legends. These are documented cases with physical evidence, some of it still sitting in museums right now, at the center of repatriation controversies we'll discuss at the end. 3 documented cases, 3 completely different contexts, 3 reasons why the desert was chosen as executioner, priest, and judge, and one of them should be medically impossible. Let's start with the method itself. Imagine you're standing in the Mojave Desert at midday. The temperature hovers around 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Your shadow has almost disappeared beneath you, and you're watching as tribal enforcers dig a hole exactly 3 feet deep in a patch of sand that looks like every other patch, but isn't. This is diatomaceous sand, fossilized algae that creates a powder so fine, so absorbent that it pulls moisture from anything it touches. The same property that makes it useful for food storage makes it lethal for human tissue. The convicted person is placed in the hole standing upright. The sand is packed around their body from feet to neck, compressed tight enough that they cannot move, cannot fall, cannot even shift their weight. Only their head remains above ground, face exposed to the sun, mouth and nose unobstructed. Then the tribe leaves. Here's what happens next, according to a 1994 University of Nevada study that examined remains with preserved throat tissue. Hour 6. The sand begins wicking moisture from the skin's surface. The victim feels extreme thirst, but is otherwise lucid. They can see, hear, speak. Some accounts mention victims singing death songs or hurling curses. Hour 12, 24. Moisture is being pulled from deeper tissue layers. The tongue swells, lips crack and bleed. The throat tissue begins to constrict. Speech becomes difficult, then impossible, but consciousness remains.
Day 2, 3, the body enters severe dehydration. But here's the horrifying detail from the Nevada study. The throat tissue showed trauma patterns consistent with swallowing attempts, meaning they remained conscious and aware enough to experience thirst reflexes for days. Days 4 to 7, death finally comes, usually from cardiac arrest triggered by electrolyte imbalance. But by this point, the mummification process has already begun. The Spanish missionary who documented this in 1636 wrote, "The face retains expression as if the soul departed mid-scream." Now here's what challenges everything you think you know about primitive justice. This wasn't considered torture, it was considered exile. The philosophy was the land decides your fate. If you survived, if rain came, if you somehow freed yourself, if predators didn't take you, the spirits had intervened, your guilt was absolved. This happened exactly twice in recorded accounts over 3 centuries. Twice people survived. Don't click away yet, because one of those survivors is our final case, and what happened to her will haunt you. But first, you need to understand the case that makes anthropologists question everything they thought they knew about religious sacrifice, because one woman didn't just endure this death, she volunteered for it on purpose, after preparing her body for weeks. The year is 1250 CE.
Corners region is in its 3rd year of devastating drought. Crops have failed, springs have dried up, children are dying, and the spiritual leaders of what we now call the ancestral Puebloan people have made a decision. Someone needs to become a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the desert spirits, not through death, through transformation. In 1969, archaeologists working in Canyon de Chelly discovered remains that initially made no sense. A woman, approximately 35-40 years old, buried in the sand cocoon position. But unlike every other case, there were no restraint marks, no evidence of force, and her stomach contents told a story that changed everything. Bone isotope analysis revealed she had been fasting for approximately 3 weeks before burial, consuming only water and a specific mixture of herbs, the same herbs Hopi oral traditions describe as spirit preparation plants. She wasn't being punished, she was being consecrated. Here's what the ethnographic records tell us about this practice, corroborated by 5 different Puebloan oral traditions. When drought threatened tribal survival, a volunteer, always someone beyond childbearing years, always someone who chose freely, would undergo preparation. They would fast, they would pray, they would ingest substances that slowed their metabolism and altered their consciousness, and then they would be buried alive in the desert. But here's the part that separates this from execution. The tribe didn't leave. They stayed nearby, in sight, chanting continuously for 3 days and nights. They witnessed, they participated spiritually. This wasn't abandonment, it was accompaniment. The belief was profound. The volunteer's body had to become of the desert while still alive, had to cross the threshold between human and landscape while consciousness remained. Only then could they carry prayers to the spirits who controlled rain. The last documented case of this practice occurred in 1879, witnessed and recorded by an anthropologist named James Stevenson. He wrote, "I have never seen anything more serene than her face during the ceremony, nor have I seen anything more terrible than the faces of those who loved her, forced by tradition to watch." Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This is just glorifying human sacrifice. But stay with me, because understanding the why is crucial for what comes next. This wasn't cruelty. This was love taken to an extreme we can't fathom. A mother figure literally becoming the landscape to save her children. The case we're about to discuss, that's not love, that's revenge. The year is 1583. Spanish conquistadors have been pushing into the Southwest for 4 decades, and a woman whose name was deliberately erased from history is about to die for a betrayal so profound that even death isn't punishment enough. The primary source for this case is a document called Relación de la Jornada, the journey's account, written by a Spanish scribe traveling with the Coronado expedition. He recorded it not as horror, but as curiosity, as ethnography.
The woman was the wife of a tribal leader, and she had been providing intelligence to Spanish forces about water sources, village locations, and defensive positions. When the tribe discovered her betrayal, they faced a choice. Quick execution would send her spirit to the same afterlife as every other tribal member. That wasn't acceptable. They needed to erase her completely. The remains discovered in 1982 and analyzed by the University of Arizona tell us exactly how this worked. Detail 1. Her wrists showed deep restraint marks, not from ropes, but from rawhide that had been soaked and then dried, shrinking as it tightened. Her arms were bound behind her back in a position that would have been agonizing within hours. Detail 2. There was no water source within 3 miles of the burial site. Even if she had somehow freed herself, she couldn't have survived the journey. Detail 3, and here's the detail that made me pause when reading the archaeological report. There were remnants of yucca fiber around her orbital sockets. Her eyes had been sewn open. Think about what that means. She couldn't blink, couldn't close her eyes against the desert sun or the sand-filled wind. The moisture in her eyes would have evaporated within hours, the pain unimaginable. But here's the detail that reveals the spiritual dimension of this punishment. She was positioned facing away from tribal lands. Every other burial in that region, ceremonial, accidental, or otherwise, faces toward the rising sun or toward the Pueblon. This woman faced toward Spanish territory. The message was explicit. You chose them. Die looking toward them. And when your spirit wanders, may it wander in their lands, not ours. The Spanish scribe who documented this wrote something chilling in his account. After describing the burial, he added, "I asked the savages if this was common justice. Their elder replied, 'This is not justice. Justice would have been quick. This is removal.'" I've spent 3 years researching pre-Columbian legal systems for this channel, and this case represents something profound, evidence that these cultures understood psychological torture, spiritual warfare, and symbolic punishment at levels that rival anything in European legal tradition. But here's where I need you to hold on, because the final case is going to challenge everything we've discussed. What happens when this practice, designed for criminals and volunteers, is used on a child? And what happens when that child survives? If you've made it this far, you've earned the truth about the case that ended this practice forever and cost an entire culture their judicial autonomy. The year is 1892. The place is the San Carlos Apache Reservation in Arizona, and an 8-year-old girl is about to become the final victim of a tradition that had existed for over 1,000 years. According to Bureau of Indian Affairs Report 471A, filed in September 1892, the girl had been accused of witchcraft by tribal elders, the specific accusation causing the death of 3 infants.
Supernatural means. Now, modern analysis suggests these were likely deaths from disease that we'd now identify as pustulus or measles. But in a community devastated by forced relocation, facing starvation and trauma, people searched for explanations, and sometimes they found scapegoats. The tribal council made a decision: punishment, not execution. She would be buried for 24 hours, enough to break the curse, but not to kill. After 1 day, she would be retrieved, and if she survived, her guilt would be considered purged. This was documented. This was planned. This was supposed to be survivable. It went wrong. The rescue party arrived 62 hours after burial. The delay was due to confusion about the burial location. Multiple sites had been prepared, and miscommunication between tribal factions led searchers to the wrong area first. When they found her, she was still alive. Let me read you the exact words from the federal agent's report, because sanitizing them would be dishonest. The child was conscious but non-responsive. Her skin had taken on a leather-like quality, particularly on the face and neck. She was transporting to the agency hospital, where Dr. Melvin Forrest attempted treatment. The subject survived 6 days in hospital care. Her primary symptom was described as persistent delirium, in which she claimed to be tasting sand, in her words. Tissue damage was too extensive for recovery. She expired on the 6th day. Tasting sand, in her words. That phrase haunts me because it suggests that even in delirium, even while dying, her brain was still processing the sensory horror of what had been done to her. Here's what the medical reality was, based on the doctor's notes and modern forensic analysis. After 62 hours in diatomaceous sand, her subcutaneous tissue had already begun the desiccation process. Her mucous membranes, mouth, throat, nasal passages were permanently damaged. Her kidneys were failing. She was, in the most literal sense, dying from the inside out, while her heart continued beating. The doctor noted that she required continuous moisture application to her skin because it would crack and bleed within minutes of drying. She had begun mummifying while alive. Now, here's where this case gets complicated in ways that should make all of us uncomfortable. This incident became federal ammunition. Within 3 months, the Indian Offenses Act was expanded to explicitly ban all traditional punishment practices. The San Carlos Apache lost the right to enforce their own justice system. Federal courts took over completely. The question nobody wants to ask, was she saved, or was her suffering used as an excuse to destroy what remained of tribal sovereignty? Because here's what the historical record shows. The government agents who rescued her had been looking for justification to override tribal courts. They got it. And here's what nobody tells you about what happened next. The girl's body was not returned to her tribe. It was sent to the Army Medical Museum in Washington, D.C. for study. It remained there, cataloged as specimen A471, until 2003, when NAGPRA repatriation laws finally forced its return. She was buried again, this time with honor, with ceremony, with her people present 111 years after her death. So what do we do with this knowledge? Right now, there are remains from at least 4 documented sand burial cases sitting in museums across the United States. 3 are involved in active NAGPatriation battles. 1 remains on display, though the placard has been updated 3 times to reflect evolving ethical standards. 3 cases, 3 completely different contexts. A judicial exile where the desert decided fate. A voluntary sacrifice where love demanded the ultimate transformation. A punishment for betrayal that tried to erase a soul. And a child who survived the unsurvivable only to have her suffering weaponized by the government that claimed to rescue her. None of these fit cleanly into our modern framework of torture or execution or justice. They exist in moral territories we're not comfortable navigating. Here's the question that keeps me awake. Who owns suffering? Do these remains belong in climate-controlled museum storage, available for scientific study, teaching future generations about historical practices? Or do they belong in the ground with the people who share cultural continuity with those who died this way, finally getting the rest that was denied them in life? I'm going to ask you to do something difficult. Don't answer immediately. Don't go with your gut reaction. Think about why you believe what you believe. Think about what your answer reveals about how you view indigenous sovereignty, scientific inquiry, historical reckoning, and the rights of the dead. Then leave your answer in the comments. Not right or wrong, just honest. Because this isn't ancient history. This is happening right now in courtrooms and museum boardrooms and tribal council meetings. The girl who tasted sand, in her words. Her name was finally spoken again at her repatriation ceremony in 2003. I'm not including it here because her descendants requested privacy, but she has a name, she had a life, and now, finally, she has a proper burial. If you want to continue exploring history's most brutal truths, the ones that challenge us, that make us uncomfortable, that force us to confront complexity, subscribe to this channel. Next week, I'm investigating the execution method the Mongols used that was so effective, neighboring empires adopted it immediately. It makes what we discussed today look merciful. Until then, sit with this discomfort. It means you're thinking.